No, you know what it'll smell like?
What?
Ferrets.
I like the smell of ferrets. They kind of smell like weed. What's up, witches? It's Claudia here, and I have some exciting news. Finally, we have created a Patreon. So you can find us at patreon.com/truecrimecovenpod. At the moment, there is only one tier. It's the familiar tier, and it's just where you can chuck us £1 just to help keep us going every month. We aim to expand on this and create new tiers and exciting content. But for now, if you'd like to support us in this way, please do go ahead. That's patreon.com/truecrimecovenpod. Enjoy the episode, guys. What's up, witches? Hi, I'm Claudia.
And I'm Simon.
And welcome to True Crime Coven. Hi Simon, how are you?
Hello, Claudia. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, you doing good?
Yeah, it's a bit weird. Being this side of the recording.
Yeah, so I don't know if people are aware. They should do, because we mentioned you. But Simon is our editor, our lovely editor.
Hello.
And with Jess being, off and just obviously doing things, bits and pieces.
Doing our baby.
Doing a baby.
Yeah.
I asked Simon if he'd like to come on. He was like, actually, I was going to say I'm happy to come on. So now you're in front of the microphone and probably regretting that decision.
I said that a while ago. Yeah. We'll see how this turns out.
And I held you to it.
Yeah,
so
we'll see whether this episode actually gets released.
Oh, please. So, yeah, you take mine and Jess's nonsense every week, and you can attest that there's a lot of nonsense that everyone else doesn't hear. There
is a lot of nonsense. One day.
One
People
day.
might hear it.
And you make it into a listen-worthy episode. And so, first of all, a massive thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Because I think when people think about podcasts, like they think of the hosts, and sometimes they think about the research that goes into it. But I don't think people always think about the editing. It is important, but I don't think people always think about the editing.
I mean, this is fairly simple. It's an audio podcast at the moment. It's not particularly complicated, apart from the waffle. But even that, what do we release? Like a 45-minute, hour, depending obviously what the subject matter is, podcast. It probably takes me about, if I actually sat down and did it in one go, which I never do because I get distracted, it'd probably take about 5 hours to do.
Yeah, it's a hard slog.
Whatever video editing is even worse than that. It's usually like an hour per minute or something like that when you get into like proper like production and that. But
yeah,
no, editing is as you say, often not ignored, but sort of forgotten about thing when you deal with, like you say, audio and video stuff where people, the work goes into presenting, which it does, but yeah.
I would say your job's harder. I come on and just waffle and I research.
It just takes longer. It's not really harder. It's probably easier than that.
It's painstaking.
Yes, it just takes more time because you can only do it so fast. So
yeah, and it's tedious at times, especially when you've got to listen to a Londoner and a Bristolian just go on about complete shite that's off topic.
Cut out various bits.
And you just sit there like, really? And a lot of people may not know this, but you edit for us for free and you offered to do that. And I can't be more thankful, because if you hadn't done that, this wouldn't exist, because, or at least it wouldn't exist, because I would have had to learn how to edit and I probably would have procrastinated that for forever. So yeah, and before anyone thinks we're really mean, he only does it for free because we currently don't make any money. We've started to make $16 a month, give or take Patreon fees. And so that, of course, goes to Simon, but it's nowhere near a living wage.
But I did volunteer this, so it's not sort of
You did, but the aim is to one day give you definitely a livable wage. And that's just for full transparency as well, that that's where the money goes. It's not a plug to say, like, subscribe to our Patreon so Simon can eat.
They do. Everybody should.
But Simon does need to eat, and, £16 a week only gets you so much, or $16. I'm always confused as to what it is.
Pounds? It might be pounds, actually.
I'm confused, because then it said that we got 2 lots of 16, but what turned up in the PayPal account wasn't 2 lots of 16. So,
as you say, but there's definitely sort of cuts and fees and stuff in there. But
and some conversion rate, maybe.
Whatever.
But yeah, so thank you so much. I genuinely, this wouldn't exist without you. And yeah, I'm really thankful. I'm so thankful for it. Especially because you offered, and then I was like, oh yeah, that'd be nice. And then it took me a while to take you up on it, and maybe you felt like you couldn't back out, much like recording today.
It was about 7 months.
Just some time. A small amount of time passed. So Simon, is there anything you want to tell us about yourself? I know that you don't like being in the spotlight so much, but...
No, I mean, I call myself a freelance editor, if you want to call it that. Basically means I do bits and bobs like this, and and
hopefully you normally get paid better.
Possibly. And no, I mean, I'm also down in the southwest. Let's say that you're in Bristol. I'm down in Cornwall.
Yes,
so I'm keep even more
saying
southwest.
Devon to you. I asked you if you lived near Torquay at one point, and you were like, no, because that's Devon.
Grossly offended.
Yeah, you were grossly offended.
Unlike Jess, as everyone can know, I'm definitely from Cornwall. This is a authentic
Cornish accent.
Well,
isn't Cornwall now its own country, technically?
I think some people might like to think so, but not really.
So, the month is October.
Yep.
The atmosphere is spooky. Spooky.
So just all ghost stories, yeah? That's all we're doing this month, just all ghost stories.
Well, in a way, this true crime case is a bit of a ghost story. So I did want to honour this month, this Halloween month in the podcast. It seemed fitting. Mm-hmm. Ideally, we would have done a theme of sorts, like 13 episodes in a row or something. But that just wasn't doable for anyone's schedule.
That's a lot of work.
That's so much work that I, were also not that organised.
No.
But of course, ghost stories are always inherently spooky, so we had that covered. But I didn't want to leave the listeners who come for the true crime empty-handed for the whole of October. So I decided to look up some true crime cases that sort of fit into the Halloween theme. They have a spooky edge, shall we say.
Okay.
That being said, as always, these are real people, real victims. So regardless, the Halloween true crime cases are still going to be handled with respect. We aren't going to be sat here like, oh, spoopy doopy murder, like that will never be us. I hope to never get to that point.
You should hear some of the stuff that Cordy and Jess say about people off. Oh, I have to cut it. Some of the things they're saying about people, it's awful. Oh, it's so...
You're not meant to tell everyone. I know, it's just a fake PC thing, isn't
Exactly.
it? We're like, yeah, we're really inauthentic.
No, so yes, you say, but it is spooky, but still
respectful. Yeah. So, with that being said, let's jump into today's true crime case. Simon, have you ever heard of Carl Tanzler?
Nope, I have not.
So, I actually don't know how much true crime you listen to in real life, if any.
Apart from the wonderful True Crime Covenant podcast.
Yeah, of course, the top #1 podcast.
Not actively, by any means, so not to the level that you and Jess do.
Do you not? I
probably absorb it more than anything, sort of almost by accident with things rather than actually, as you say, listening to podcasts or things like that. But I've watched, you watch things on telly, don't you, where it technically is true crime. It's just not necessarily labelled as such. But so, yeah, I have found it interesting. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I suppose I should also ask you, do you believe in ghosts?
Absolutely not. You two are rambling on every other week about blooming ghosts. No, not really. I would just say I'm a bit more sceptical than you two.
And you're just like, they do not exist. And there's me and Jess like, absolutely, 100%.
I would just say I am not as committed as you and Jess.
Not ghost inclined.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, let's get into a bit of Carl Tanzler.
Right.
So the name seemed a bit familiar to me, but I'm not sure if that's because I looked up cases for Halloween beforehand a while ago and then came back to him. Or, if I have actually taken something in and not realised.
Yeah.
So before we go any further, I will do trigger warnings. There's a few. There is a brief mention of miscarriage, but no details. There is mutilation of a corpse and ill mental health with mention of psychosis. And there is necrophilia. So quite a few things there. And if these are things that you don't want to listen to or can't listen to right now, absolutely no worries. Look after yourself and we'll see you next time.
Does that include me?
No, you have to stay.
Can I not listen to it? That sounds terrible.
Yeah, I did say it was a case and a half.
Oh, goody.
So, let's begin our case today by speaking about Karl Tanzler. Karl Tanzler, also known as Count Karl von Cosel, was born George Karl Tanzler on February 8th, 1877. Today, however, we'll just refer to him as Karl Tanzler, or Karl. As one of his names might suggest, he was born in Germany. Dresden to be exact, which is the capital city of the German state of Saxony and its second most populous city. Not gonna lie, I didn't know Germany had states. You learn something new every day. I know very little about geography.
Just dropping this in here, and I will leave this in. Geography with Claudia and Jess is hilarious. It never gets in. It's always cut out because usually it's so bad. I don't want to make people think that stupid, but honestly, it's amazing how little these two know about the world.
I know a lot about the world, nothing about where everything is. I had a really bad geography teacher, and I'm not calling her out, but I once tried to get involved in the lesson and she told me if I didn't stop asking questions, she'd move me to the back of the classroom. So she weren't great. Karl Tanzler grew up in Imperial Germany, but must have had the urge to travel, because whilst timelines are a bit difficult to come by, we know that he arrived in Australia from India prior to the start of World War I. Now, can I just say, some sources say Austria, which makes more sense to me, but I then looked up where he goes on to be in Australia, or in Austria. I looked up the place name, and it is somewhere that exists in Australia.
Well, if it did arrive there from India, that would make sense.
Again, you would know.
It wouldn't make sense to go from Germany to India to Austria. That would be a bit sort of...
True, no, I know that much.
See, that's what I'm saying.
The editorial note of an article by Karl von Cosel, aka Karl Tanzler, in the Rosicrucian Digest suggests that he stayed in Australia for 10 years, despite his plans originally to only stop there briefly, and that when the war broke out, the British military authorities placed him in a camp for safekeeping, along with officers from India and China who were prisoners of war. He was later moved to Trial Bay, to a castle-like prison on the cliffs, and that is where I looked up, and that does exist in Australia. So, at the end of the war, no prisoner was allowed to return to their residence, and instead they were all taken to the prisoners' exchange in Holland. Whilst this is his account only, and so may not be completely factual, another prisoner named Nyanatiloka Mahathera, and I hope I said that right, was able to corroborate his story, and also stated that he and Karl Tanzler planned to escape from Trial Bay with the sailboat that they had built in secret. And I'll give them that. That's quite cool. Secret sailboat? Badass.
Fair dues.
You know, yeah. Also, very good of your hands. However, we don't know if it actually floated.
But did it happen though?
Did it happen? Did it float? Karl Tanzler then returned to Germany to find his mother, whom he hadn't heard of since the war had broken out. Thankfully, she was safe and he stayed with her for 3 years. In around 1920, Karl married a woman named Doris Schaefer, and together they had 2 daughters, with Aisha being born in 1922 and Clarissa just 2 years later in 1924. Sadly though, Clarissa died of diphtheria, although I couldn't find information on how long she lived for. Again, bit patchy there. Karl's mother suggested to him that he emigrate to America like his sister, and so, in 1926, he did just that. Setting sail from Rotterdam on February 6, 1926, Karl journeyed to Havana in Cuba. After arriving there, he then settled in Zephyrhills in Pasco County, Florida, where his sister resided. Doris and his 2 daughters then joined him later. In 1927, Karl Tanzler took a job at the U.S. Marine Hospital on Florida's Key West Island as a radiology technician, under the name of Karl von Cosel. With these 2 locations being almost 300 miles apart, Karl left his wife and daughters behind in order to start this chapter in his life. And it is here that our case truly begins. On April 22nd, 1930, whilst working at the US Marine Hospital, 53-year-old Karl Tanzler met a 21-year-old patient called Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, whom people called Helen. However, she is most commonly referred to throughout my research as Elena, so that's how I'll refer to her in today's case. I don't know if that's because Helen and Elena are sort of interchangeable between cultures, maybe.
I also have really, really high hopes for her. I am sure she's going to be fine. I have no worries whatsoever.
we are all rooting for Elena. Elena was the middle daughter of a local cigar maker called Francisco Pancho Hoyos, and her mother was Aurora Milagro. Her older sister was Florinda Milagro Hoyos, who was affectionately known as Nana, and her younger sister was named Celia Milagro Hoyos. And on a completely unrelated side note here, how beautiful are the names in this case, by the way. We've got like Aisha, Clarissa,
Hard for
Aurora,
you to say, but yeah.
Celia. I'm just loving the names. I think they're nice. Elena's also a really nice name. Love them. On February 18th, 1926, Elena married a man named Luis Mesa. However, he left Elena after she miscarried their child and moved to Miami. So he sounds charming.
What a guy.
I know, like, what a lad. However, legally, Elena and Luis would stay married. Elena was said to be seen as a local beauty on the island of Key West, with her beautiful curly dark hair and matching dark eyes, along with her lightly tanned Cuban complexion, generally associated with those of Hispanic and Latino heritage. And I hope I'm right in saying that Cubans are both considered Latino and Hispanic, because my research threw up both and conflicting information. And so I tried to educate myself, but if anyone is more educated than myself on this, please feel free to correct me. And so back to April 22nd, 1930, Carl met Elena at the hospital after her mother brought her in for an examination. And instantly, Carl felt that he recognised her as the woman from his visions. You see, Carl claimed that during his childhood, and also whilst travelling in Italy, he had been visited by visions of a long-dead alleged ancestor known as Countess Anna Constantia von Kozel, who was, by the way, a real person, a noble woman who lived from 1680 to 1765. Anyway, he claimed that she revealed to him the face of his true love, an exotic, dark-haired woman. And so, when the exotic, dark-haired Elena stepped into the room, he believed that she was his true love. Sadly, Elena's diagnosis would turn out to be tuberculosis, a bacterial infection that usually affects the lungs of the infected individual, but can affect any part of the body. It is spread through tiny droplets from coughs or sneezes of the infected person being inhaled by another individual. Today, although still a potentially serious condition, it can be successfully treated with antibiotics. However, in 1930, a diagnosis of tuberculosis, sometimes shortened to TB, was essentially a death sentence, with the transmission of infections, both viral and bacterial, much less understood. Additionally, it wasn't until November 1944 that antibiotics were first used to treat tuberculosis. And the usual treatments at the time for TB, though it isn't known if these methods were necessarily carried out on Elena, were invasive surgery, as well as having dedicated facilities for those with the infection to live in, a famous place of note being the allegedly haunted Waverly Hills Sanatorium. It was believed that fresh air itself was a great treatment for TB as well. And I also really want to visit Waverly Hills Sanatorium. It's also got like a body chute that they used to put the bodies through that you can walk
Doesn't every
through.
building? Do you not have one of them?
Oh no, I think ours got bricked up, unfortunately.
Oh.
Carl Tanzler fancied himself somewhat of a medical expert.
Of course he did.
Of course. And whilst he may have been a medical professional as a radiography technician, a highly skilled job in itself, a doctor he was not. I mean, I'm a nurse, but I am not a doctor. And this didn't stop him from trying to treat Elena with a variety of medicines, as well as x-rays and electrical equipment that he would bring round to her family home. According to the Ghost City Tours website, Carl even used electrodes to shock Elena, believing that he could charge her oxygen electrons to cure her. He also showered the young woman with gifts, bringing her jewellery and clothing, even went as far as to profess his love to her, but there is no evidence to suggest that Elena returned his affections, although Carl did form a close relationship with her and her entire family. And I mean, he would. He's round there every week, bringing her presents, trying to save their daughter's life. I imagine most people were kind of thankful in one regard, even if they're a bit weirded out.
And so far, you see, it's, not sounding too bad. It's a bit sort of, getting a bit involved, but...
I mean, he is 53 and she's 21.
He's trying to help. Oh, that part of it, the sort of infatuation part of it, but he's trying to help,
Yeah, and if you just, most people would do anything for their children to be, cured of horrible illnesses, especially something
Sure.
like TB, where you see someone just like literally coughing their guts up.
Yeah.
So I get it. But sadly, at the age of just 22, Elena died on October 25th, 1931 at 4:30 p.m. in her parents' home at Key West, with Carl only knowing her for around 18 months in total. Heartbroken, but determined to provide for the woman he believed to be his true love, Carl Tanzler offered to pay for Elena's funeral, which the family accepted, and it was to take place the very next day, which I don't know if that was a custom, but just seems like
Possibly even just of the time. You don't know whether it's just, just people just got on with it because it was sort of, there's no facility or no sort of money to, not
keep someone.
Just do it.
Yeah, and also I know that it wasn't the most populated island that it is today, so they probably could have a quick turnaround, so to speak.
Sure.
Family and friends passed by Elena's open casket to pay their last respects. As Carl passed by, he placed a letter inside her coffin, which read in part, "You are free to go wherever you wish. Elena, please come to me, sweetheart. I long so much for you." With Elena now deceased and put to rest, you might think that Carl Tanzler would continue on with his life as usual, grieving occasionally for, in his mind, his lost love. But it would appear that Elena's death would do nothing to stop Carl spending his life with her. After their beloved daughter died in their home, the Hoyos family decided they could not bear to live there anymore and decided to move to another town. When they told Carl of this, though, he couldn't understand how they could leave the place that Elena had called home. He demanded that he rent Elena's old room from them, complete with all her old furniture. He wrote in his memoirs that from then on he slept in Elena's bed, which still preserved the sweet scent of her hair. I also gather from this, though it wasn't expressly said, that they still moved out.
Right.
And I gather from this because of what you'll see later. He became worried about the state of her body, though, having only been placed in a shallow grave, and with the area expecting heavy rainfall. Carl Tanzler wrote in his memoirs about how he decided then to erect a mausoleum for his darling Elena. And so he began planning this meticulously, buying an additional plot to house the grand tribute and shelter. But with the rain still coming, he decided he needed to ensure that Elena wasn't decomposing. And so, as far as Carl states, though we only have his word to go on, he removed her body from the grave, that was indeed in a state of decomposition, as to be expected, and took her to a mortuary with the permission of a mortician, where they returned her back to a more decent state and placed her in a new coffin, and then sealed that coffin into a new metal outer coffin, which was supposedly airtight. And I can see your face, Simon. I know. It gets worse. He also writes about how, on another night, he placed it into an incubation tank with antiseptic and nourishing fluid for body cells. Essentially, he suspended her in a solution similar to formaldehyde, though of course it is not known how embellished his memoirs are. When the mausoleum was complete, Elena was once again laid to rest there. It was constructed to look like a small summer home, with a short and wide door that came to a point with a window inside. On the other side of the door were two small pillars on which to place flowers, and to the right of the door, if you're looking at the mausoleum, was a plaque with Elena's inscription, bearing her name, birth and death dates, and the Latin inscription on the burial site read, are you ready for this?
Oh, I'm ready.
Assacitus ab angelus, which translates in English to summoned by angels. Some reports state that whilst the Hoyos family gave permission to Carl to construct the tomb, they were unaware that he would hold a key to it. Although to me this kind of goes without saying, like it looks like a very usable door. Mausoleums are less common nowadays and a lot of them don't have doors or like easy doors per se, do they? But this very much looks like a normal door, like it's got a brass door handle.
I know what you mean. You often assume it's more just like it's a sort of grand big tombstone rather than actually
like
being
chamber.
An accessible thing, like a
often like it's like bricked up or like it's like a brick door that
it's
you'd
not
really
meant
have
to be
to
accessed. It's like that they're in there. It's not meant to be
you're not meant to visit them.
No. Knock.
Carl didn't get that memo.
No.
Though.
That's because Carl's a little bit crazy.
Yeah. So Carl visited Elena every day, sitting inside the mausoleum on a small chair beside her coffin. Then, one day, He claimed her coffin sprung open after he had fallen asleep during his visit. He thought this to be a practical joke from Elena, referring to himself as her bridegroom in his writings and talking about how she liked to joke around. He goes on to say that he heard scratching coming from inside the coffin and so removed the lid to find her inner coffin still perfectly intact, because of course he removed the metal lid. After removing that lid, so now the normal coffin lid, and checking the incubator's filter, he said the mausoleum was filled with the scent of his much-loved bride and the smell of her hair, and that it smelt like a warm, living young woman. And he kind of seems like a bit obsessed with the smell of her hair, doesn't he? Like, that just stuck out to me.
And that's in his writing. Never mind, that's actually him writing that as well. It's not sort of reported.
That's not speculation. He's talking... I mean, it's speculation that's how nice it smells.
He's saying that, though. He's using the words and he's actually saying, ooh, the smell of her hair. And
I know, like, a lot of women, like, the smell of the hair is sort of, like, associated with them, because obviously if you hug a woman, you can smell her hair.
But I don't think it carries on when you're dead.
No. I don't think if you use Pantene Pro V, that's going to be the overwhelming smell, After that day, Carl said that Elena began speaking with him, and that he would hear her voice distinctly and know that she was there with him. He would bring her flowers every night, along with other gifts, much like he had when she was still alive. On one Christmas afternoon, Carl was visiting when he said he felt hands on his face and head, and that the touch was familiar to him. It was Elena's. He took photos, and when they were developed, he saw a white human figure outlined in the entrance to the tomb. He assumed this to be a curious passerby and was annoyed by the intrusion, so much so that he changed his visiting time to much later, during darkness hours, so as to not be disturbed. However, when he approached during one night, when the cemetery was brightly lit by the light of the full moon, he saw a white figure once again standing by the door of the tomb. The figure vanished through the locked door, and when Carl entered the mausoleum, he smelled the familiar sweet scent he associated with Elena, and probably her hair. Next, he began to hear Elena singing over the coming weeks. She was singing what he called, quote-unquote, their song, La Boda Negra, which is about a heartbroken lover digging up the body of his deceased love. Carl took this as a sign and stated that he then hatched a plan with Elena, who said that her friend in the grave next door would help them as well. Oigan la historia que contóme un día, un viejo enterrador de la comarca, era un amante que por suerte impía, su dulce bien le arrebató la barca. So not only is he speaking to Elena is apparently friends with the woman buried next door to her, and is like, that one will help us with this plan. Pals. I mean, that's nice if the afterlife is that, and I suppose that it's going to be really, really lonely to be in an urn, because let's be honest, none of us can afford to get buried. So keep your urns together. Do you want to be buried? I very much don't mind what happens to me once I'm dead. I can't think if you've touched on this before. I can't think if you and Jess have talked about it, but I was wondering if you had any sort of strong feelings either way. I think I'd rather be burnt, but to be honest with you, I want to donate my body to science because it might as well do something useful. To be honest with you, I'll leave it up to whoever's there to look after me. Yeah. Karen. Karen will do it. Now, we all know I believe in ghosts and hauntings. And I do believe that our loved ones here can come back to us and can communicate to us. And this could be the case here. But I think more so that we're seeing a mental health crisis. And we're seeing psychosis. Well, I was going to say, if you imagine, this all essentially stems back from him seeing the ghost of his, whatever that relative was, a long dead ancestor. That's where this all came from, really, wasn't it? With earmarking Elena as the love of his life. So it's all coming from essentially as you say, whether it's a ghost or not, a sort of delusion that he's got. Yeah. So it's not surprising then that you've ended up with a situation where he's fixated on this. So I think in today's terms, we would see this as someone with a mental health history, undiagnosed or not picked up on. And then we would see this as a descent into some sort of delusion. Interestingly, mental health professionals say that you can't have hallucinations and delusions at once. It's either one or the other. So I don't know whether we'd say he's delusional or he's having auditory hallucinations. Mm-hmm. But either way, something's going on. I think the disproportionate infatuation of a young woman more than half his age who didn't appear to reciprocate his feelings is sort of red flag number one.
Well, yes.
And, age gaps can be completely fine. And then I also think the fact that his feelings just developed so quickly is also concerning. Now, I'm not saying that this doesn't happen. I'm actually listening to a true crime case called Matty by Casefile at the moment, which I highly recommend. It's a 10-episode case where they've included the family talking about the disappearance of their son. And in that, they talk about how they met and were married within a few months, and they've now been together 43 years. So it happens. True love happens like that sometimes.
But as you said,
again,
that's where it's reciprocated. So that's not the same thing, is it? And also, it's the fact that he has continued the infatuation, as you say. Basically, that's what it is after she's dead.
There's being like the fair enough if you don't want to remarry or you don't want to get in another relationship, like you're dedicated to them. But that's very different to this level of digging up the body.
Yes.
I think that's the line, isn't it?
I think you discussed this only a few weeks ago. There's the line,
There's the line. We found it.
Don't cross that.
Yeah, I feel like he's not mentally well. That's my feeling, personally. And this, alongside digging up her body to preserve her, if that truly did happen, we don't know, are just clear signs of mental illness. And even if he didn't dig up her body, the fact that he fabricated it in his own memoirs is a bit concerning, because who fabricates that?
Exactly. You're bringing in more problems than actually would be even if you were just doing half of it. You're actually making it worse for yourself.
I guess it could be like fantasy, people could say, but I feel like you'd have different fantasies. You'd have a fantasy of her like coming back to life or something.
Yeah, this is almost, you wouldn't make this up.
No, you wouldn't think
the
so.
The things
anyway.
you did, never mind why you did them. You wouldn't make the things you did up if you did those things. It would be unusual.
Exactly. It's all very unusual. I did warn you.
Yeah.
Now, as we said, being buried these days is rare. It's expensive. The only person I know who's been buried is my granddad, and I think that was something that was reserved years ago. And whilst I think it's totally normal that most people don't want to imagine what happens to their loved ones once they're buried or put to rest in whatever way, and the less said about that, the better, I imagine it would be even more painful for them to then remove them from the ground and restore them. Now, I'm not squeamish. I've seen some things in my time as a nurse, but even I don't really like the thought of that.
No.
I can't imagine many people do. I imagine many people, no matter what, don't go to those lengths.
No.
So do I think he was being visited by Elena's ghost and being told to remove her from her grave? No. Do I think Carl was mentally unstable and delusional? Yes. Or hallucinating. Regardless, one night in April 1933, Carl Tanzler crept into the cemetery and removed her body from the mausoleum on a toy wagon. Now, this is a bit of a side note as well, but one, I found it funny that he apparently had a conversation with her, according to his memoirs, where he said, "Oh, but how am I meant to get you out of here? Like, people are used to seeing coffins going in, but they're not used to seeing them come out," which I just thought was quite a good observation he had.
That's fair.
Apparently, in order to make sure no one saw, he put like a sheet over the railings of the cemetery, which makes sense. But then as he was getting her over the railings, because I presume it was locked at night, is what they're going on, he fell and the coffin fell on him, is one thing I saw. I don't know if that's correct, but I thought it was a side note because it's kind of like...
That's like an awful comedy film.
Exactly. It's something that would happen in In-Betweeners.
Just got a coffin out of a graveyard and it just lands on you.
It's a bit reminiscent of... Did you ever watch Skins?
I am far too old for Skins. That was your Skins talk with Emma.
With Emma.
And I was just going, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about.
Skins is pretty good, you know.
I'm too old.
Well, there's a bit in Skins where one of the characters, and this isn't a spoiler because if you haven't watched it by now, you know, one of the characters, Chris, dies and they're not allowed to go to his funeral because the dad doesn't like the friends. So they steal his coffin and they're driving around Bristol streets, which are obviously really hilly, with it in the car. So honestly, it just reminds, like, if that happened, that's just a bit like In Between as Skinsy to me, like. But I don't know if it did. This is the thing. A lot of this story is like, but we do know this happened.
We know certain things happened, but not necessarily in what order and or if it's all true.
No, but we know this happened.
Yep.
There is proof, which we'll get onto.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once home, in the house that Elena too had once called home while she was alive, Carl again preserved her body. And this we know to be a fact. So, in order to do so, he attached her corpse's bones together with piano wire and coat hangers. He fitted her face with glass eyes. As the skin had begun to decompose, he replaced it with silk cloth, which was soaked in wax and plaster of Paris. And like plaster of Paris is rock hard, by the way. Like wax kind of makes more sense, but plaster of Paris is like knock on it hard.
Well, this goes back to what you were saying about the apparently made that a boat.
Yeah. I mean,
you know, he's
maybe he should have been a doll maker,
which is also creepy.
I'm going to a doll museum this weekend.
You are insane.
The person I'm going with really loves dolls, so I thought it's creepy. They're going to think it's great.
You've had many a doll conversation on the ghost.
Dolls are creepy.
With Jess, and you haven't made them creepy. You know, gone to, and I find dolls incredibly creepy. I'm
not going to sleep at the museum, though.
So my girlfriend's mum has a doll, which I think someone made for her when she was a kid, when she was young. It's quite big.
That's cute.
It's quite large. It's like a sort of soft doll. It's called Jessica.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry, Jess. And Jessica always terrifies me. And then one time when I went to see her mum had put, you know, those vacuum storage bags that you put like clothes into, like sort of.
Oh yeah.
You know, so they take up less space. She put Jessica in one of them to sort of tidy away, and that's the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. A sort of a vacuum packed doll,
Jessica doll
face looking at me,
squished up.
Just like no, thank you.
A fun fact, I think he would have sort of been my uncle or my cousin. He's one of those relatives that's like, you're not sure what he is to you, but he's something to you.
Yep.
I can't remember his last name now, but his first name was, Frank Mumford. But he was quite a famous puppeteer who put on shows for the royal family with his puppets. And when he died, my sort of aunt, Jenny, she was the one closest to him. She had to get all his puppets and his dolls and transport them around the country. Like some of them are in the V&A and stuff, and which is the Victoria and Albert Museum for anyone who's not aware. And she said that one night they stayed in a hotel and she couldn't leave them in the car because they're so precious that if something happened to them, but they didn't want them in the room with them, so they sort of like put them in the room and put loads of things on top of them because they were just so freaked out. So, as we were saying, as the skin began to decompose, he replaced it with silk cloth, soaked in wax and plaster of Paris, very hard. He then replaced Elena's hair that fell out with a wig that he fashioned from cuttings of her own hair. To keep the form of her body, he stuffed her chest cavity and abdomen with rags, and then dressed her remains in stockings, jewellery and gloves, and also clothes. It wasn't included in the description, but clothes. He then reportedly slept with her body in his bed, or should I say Elena's old bed, every night. To cover up the smell of decomposition, Carl used perfumes, disinfectants and preserving agents.
I don't think that's working.
I also think Carl used denial.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think you can, you can spray as much air freshener as you like. That is not going away.
Yeah, if we ever release a True Crime Coven perfume, which would be crazy in and of itself, we will call it denial because that's what he's using.
I think you'll find it'll be a candle. I think that's the go-to now, isn't it? A room candle. I
have got all my candles lit.
Because the go-to now seems to be awful smelling candles as well, doesn't it? You know, sort of the trend
there's so many lovely candles as well in TK Maxx at the moment that are really spooky and all great. And I go to smell them and they're just...
But no. I say it's all right if it's intentional. But if it's just genuinely bad.
No, denial can smell lovely. It'll smell like...
No, you know what it'll smell like?
What?
Ferrets.
I like the smell of ferrets. They kind of smell like weed. Now, in terms of where he restored Elena, he did so in a makeshift home laboratory.
As you do.
Yep, which he had built in the shape of an airplane. He then nicknamed this Elena's airship.
That's really boring, by the way. That's not creative at all. He's been very good so far about being creative. I'm disappointed in him, but that name is terrible.
He's just not... I mean, to be fair, I would say he's not a wordsmith, but having read his memoirs, he kind of is.
Lazy.
But then everyone spoke like how he wrote at the time.
In this one instance, lazy.
In this one, he was just like, I got nothing. According to All That's Interesting, Carl Tanzler believed that he could one day fly Elena's corpse into the stratosphere so that radiation from outer space could penetrate her tissues and restore her life. And I don't really have words to comment on that, to be honest.
That's... yeah.
Do you?
No.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
It's very much an okay. However, still not the biggest problem with that plan.
But the biggest problem is that it wouldn't work.
Exactly. I'm no physicist, or I am somewhat of a biologist, but I'm no physicist. But I don't think it's going to work.
I think we can agree that would not work.
No. If it did, I feel like it would have been done by now.
I think someone would have found that out, yeah. Yeah.
And he lived with Elena in what he would likely call marital bliss, as there were even reports that he was seen dancing with her corpse in front of an open window. This went on for, presumably, 7 years, because it wasn't until October 1940 that Elena's older sister Florinda, known as Nana, heard rumours of Carl sleeping with the disinterred body of her sister, and so went to confront him, where she found the mutilated body of her younger sister. Nana notified the police, and finally, Carl Tanzler was arrested. He was psychiatrically evaluated prior to his trial, and surprisingly, found to be mentally competent. I don't know how.
Different times.
I would say it's different times. He was charged with wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization, which I just want to say, in his defence, I don't think it was malicious.
No, in his head, it was loving, if you want to call it that. It was. He thought he was caring for her.
I don't think it was a good thing that he did, but I don't think it was a malicious thing.
Yeah, I would imagine it's one of those where that's just literally a classification of a crime.
I don't think they have space for lovingly destroying a grave, so yeah.
Yeah, they haven't got one that covers this particular crime.
No. The preliminary hearing went ahead on October 9th, 1940, at the Monroe County Courthouse in Key West. However, the statute of limitations had passed on his crime. And from what I can find, for non-serious offences now in North America, it's about 5 years.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I thought it was 5 years.
But I'm unsure what would class as a serious crime now. Like, I think this could probably be something that people would still be convicted on after that amount of time now. Because I imagine families would push for that. Nevertheless, the case against Carl Tanzler was dropped. A small while later, Elena's corpse was examined by physicians and pathologists, and even put on display at the Dean Lopez funeral home, where around 6,800 people queued to view her body. And honestly, hasn't this poor woman been through enough? She dies at age 22 from a horrible chest infection, to put it lightly.
Yeah.
She then maybe gets dug up twice and restored, and placed in an incubator surrounded by disinfectant fluid.
Sure.
She's then dug up another time.
Yeah.
Restored crudely again, and made to play house for 7 years with a man more than twice her age. But I just really think, could she just not be allowed to rest, please? She's been through so much as a dead person, probably more than she went through as an alive person.
Yeah. In a way, yeah.
And although I said that I think, I don't care what happens to my body, Elena didn't say that.
But I think we can agree that you wouldn't want this to happen.
No. I might not care what happens, but I care enough to not want this.
Yeah.
Thankfully, her body was eventually returned to the Key West Cemetery, where she was put to rest in an unmarked grave so as to avoid further tampering.
Yep.
Which is nice, but also really sad again. It seems like Elena loses again.
Nothing she did to cause that she's ended up in an unmarked grave.
No headstone, no visitors, it was in a secret location.
Yeah.
No flowers. I feel like I want to go and give this woman some flowers, to be honest. But no one can even do that now. We don't know where she is.
And as you say, that's the difference, isn't it, with the sort of burial, cremation, whichever, the sort of thing is that obviously that's the other thing. A lot of people don't now get graves because they're not buried.
No. So not only did she have all this horrendous stuff happen to her, and then she doesn't even get a headstone, she doesn't get anything. It turns out that what happened to her after death might be even worse. So 2 doctors who attended Elena's autopsy in 1940, named Dr. Fouracre, and I'm really sorry, but the other one was called Dr. Depew. And sorry, but yes, that name is Depew, as in capital D-E, capital P-O-O. And I am a child who has to point that out, I'm afraid.
You can't not laugh at that, can you?
Yeah, it's one of those ones where it's a bit like, sorry, could I have a different doctor?
if your surname is Depew, you don't go into medicine, do you? You
don't become a teacher,
job.
though. You do not become a teacher.
Good morning, Mr. Depew. Yeah, no, that's not work, is it?
I mean, I had a teacher called Dr. Poshas. Dr. Poshas? Mr. Poshas.
Mr. Poshas.
Yeah. Anyway, these 2 physicians recalled that a vaginal tube had been inserted into the vaginal area of Elena's corpse, which allowed for penetration. However, they only came out of this information in 1972, over 30 years after the case had been dropped, and since no evidence of necrophilia or of this tube was presented at the 1940 preliminary hearing, this has remained a point of contention. Personally, I think it's completely possible. I don't think, given all that we know that Carl Tanzler did do, and what he wrote about her still smelling good and everything, that it's not out of the realm of possibility that he would do something like this, but that's just my opinion. However, I don't think it's that he was necessarily into necrophilia. I just think he was really into Elena.
Because I suppose he didn't really see her as dead in a way, did he?
Yeah, and he wrote about that in his memoirs. I can't remember the exact thing he wrote, but he wrote about that. I don't think he's like, obviously like we've got people like Jeffrey Dahmer and Ed Gein who very much their whole thing was dead bodies and dead people. I don't think he's in that category. I think he's in the category of just this one woman. Because
it's not like, as you say, it's not like other bodies, it's not other people involved here, it's just one.
I think the fact that she was dead was not a good thing for him.
No.
Amazingly, and perhaps tellingly of how he could carry out this behaviour and still be found mentally sound, most locals were sympathetic towards Carl Tanzler and thought of him as simply an eccentric romantic. And for the record, I'm okay with flowers.
Yeah.
In 1944, Carl moved back to Florida, Pasco County to be exact, where he wrote an autobiography titled Fantastic Adventures, which I hope was more centred around his travelling than his love affair of Elena's corpse, although I suppose we all know which content would still sell the most copies today.
Yeah.
He lived near his wife, because remember he was still legally married to the mother of his children,
I'd forgot about her.
Yep, no, Doris is still there. And she apparently helped to support Carl in his later years, which means she is a much better woman than I, or she recognised him being mentally unwell, one or the other. Despite now being permanently separated from his true love, Carl wasn't going to stop his obsession there, because of course he wasn't. He used a death mask, apparently, to create a life-size effigy of Elena.
Of course he did.
And he lived with this until he died at age 75 on July 3rd, 1952. Now, I just want to say, why didn't he do that in the first place? But that's by the by. It took 3 weeks for his body to be found. Some people have gone on to say that he was found in the arms of his homemade effigy of Elena, but in actuality, his obituary at the time reported that he died on the floor behind one of his organs. And again, I think that's just another example of like people really like to like blow this case up more, which I don't think it needs. I feel like it needs no more. But
no.
People really like to like roll with it, don't they? And just like add things to it.
Well, as you say, they'll sort of almost romanticise it because it was sort of a strange story. So it's like, oh, it has to end with him in the arms of the effigy, sort of, rather than actually just innocuously on the floor. Yeah,
like it sounds more like, I kind of still want to say bless him because it's sad. Like he fell and couldn't get up and died. Like that's more what it sounds like to me. Behind an organ, but who knows. An article written by William Mickelfelder in 1982 also stated that renovation workers had found a note allegedly written by Carl Tanzler in which he confessed to having poisoned and killed Elena by giving her a mixture of wolfsbane and aconite, and that he did so out of mercy. Another writer backed this up by claiming that Carl Tanzler once told him that he would kill Elena if necessary to fulfill his destiny. However, in other memoirs published by Carl, he states to not be present when Elena died, and furthermore, we know TB to be an infection with a high mortality rate in the 1930s. And I know they say he did it out of mercy, as in she was suffering and, he thought he'd end it, But I just don't think he killed her. I think, if anything, he'd have done everything to keep her alive.
Yeah.
I feel like he's someone who would keep her alive despite how she was, because, I mean, he slept with her dead body. I don't think he really minded how she was. To be blunt. But overall, this case is just really bizarre. To the point, I think it's hard to believe it happened, especially considering a lot of the information comes from Carl Tanzler himself.
Yeah, it's sort of, is it one of those where, like, there's bits of truth in there? We know certain things happen, obviously, because they were documented as happening, or have, the aftermath anyway, but whether everything happened as he said, yeah.
I believe, personally, that he got her out of the grave multiple times. I don't believe a mortician was in on it. Although someone suggested that in order for him to do that, it was sort of like, well, I have to take her out for the mausoleum to be built and then we can put her back.
Yeah.
So maybe some restoration was done, because why not? She's out, I guess.
Yeah.
We know for a fact that he took her out of the grave, took her home and lived with her.
Yes.
We know for a fact how he reconstructed her, because they were able to do an autopsy.
Oh, and she was there. They found her, so it's not like they didn't know. Yeah.
And we know that all happened because there are photos of her restored body. Our photos, I will put them up on our social, but with a content warning, it won't be the first image.
No.
There's photos of the mausoleum, so we know he built that. There's photos of... Because I thought the laboratory was a bit far-fetched, and then I saw a photo and was like, oh, no, okay. So, yeah, it's something that I wouldn't believe and I don't believe until I see photos, and then I'm like, oh. I think whether, though, you believe all the accounts or just some, I think we can all agree that Elena really did not deserve what happened to her.
No.
Not only did she not deserve to catch TB, which did eventually go on to kill most of her family, but she did not deserve to just not be laid to rest. And I think that she deserved respect in her death, and her family, they really deserved their daughter to just be, and their sister, to just be left at peace. And I think that's the main takeaway from this. We always like to remember that there is a victim, and the victim here really was Elena, really was her family, and in some ways was maybe Carl, although it didn't seem like he got any pushback from doing what he did.
No.
So,
and like you say, she was a victim essentially after death.
And yeah, I think Carl was a victim in the fact that I believe he was mentally unwell, but it's not like he seemed to get any bad consequences from that. And no one believed him to be mentally unwell, not officially. And whether you think of Carl Tanzler as mentally unwell, a monster, or an eccentric romantic, I think we can also all agree that this is not normal or okay behaviour. And if you don't agree with that, just know that it's not normal or okay. Personally, I think he was very unwell, and I would love to know how a psychiatric evaluation found him anything but. I really wish we could get access to that, just because I think it'd be really interesting to see the insights and how they came to that conclusion. I wonder if it's because he wasn't necessarily seen as a danger to anyone else. But then I would say, what if he got infatuated with someone else?
Yeah.
He didn't.
Well, that's
luckily.
the other thing, like you say about Elena. She was just basically unlucky that or she was in his orbit.
This is the thing as well. So there's two books that I scanned through for this case, and they're both fictional writings that take his memoirs and have them throughout and build a story that's like a normal fictional novel around it. So I disregarded most of what they wrote and only looked at his memoir bits, because it wasn't what I was there for. Also find it a bit weird that they chose to do that. But
yep.
And I believe they said, although this was in their novel type bit, that a lot of the patients they saw, with it being a US Marine hospital, that's what they mostly dealt with, soldiers. And so it was really unusual for him to have a woman brought in to be his patient.
Yeah.
So I feel like, and with where they are, they're more likely to get women who are Hispanic.
Sure.
So I feel like he's like, oh, I was meant to fall in love with this exact woman who's got dark hair, dark eyes, and is Hispanic or Latino.
But his brain's concocted this because he knew that's what would probably be available.
Yeah.
Or be...
Exactly. That's who's going to, most likely, if a woman walks through the door, that's who is going to walk through the door. So
subconsciously he created this thing to basically match what he was going to get access to, for want of a better word.
Also, it did the classic thing. Both these books were written by men, and it did the classic thing of, as she coughed, her breasts rose. And I was like, of course a man wrote this. She can't just cough, can she?
That is definitely what happens, I'm sure. That's.
I mean, to be fair, when you cough, your chest does rise. But I was just like, it's just, you see that parody so much, don't you? And it was just like, of course, like she's coughing up blood, but it's sexy. So I guess all that's left to say is let us know what you think. What are your thoughts on Carl Tanzler? Is he a monster? Was he mentally unwell? Please let us know what you think. Send us an email or message on socials. Stick around just after our outro to hear how. So I hope you can see why I decided this was a bit of a Halloween themed case, because I'm pretty sure living with a skeleton or a corpse and having a ghost talk to you and also mention their ghost friends, I would say that covers a Halloween base.
Yeah, but it's also not often we deal with ones where, a true crime one where the body is involved, as in afterwards. It's usually the murder happens, they could do all sorts of terrible things, but then that's done, isn't it? This is very much the crime is after.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to do, we did have it with David Fuller where he was a necrophiliac. But yeah, I mean, I was going to cover Ed Gein at one point, but I actually feel like I prefer doing lesser known cases.
Yeah, I think it's easy to tap into well known things and say, but then that's been done, isn't it? That's the other thing.
Yeah,
it's.
I mean, I would have liked to have covered Jeffrey Dahmer one day because I find him one of the most interesting serial killers. I hate that people are romanticising him. Don't understand it. But now that this series come out, despite how inaccurate it is in places, I feel like there's not much need for it now.
No.
Something on the victims, absolutely. There could be like a 16 series thing just about each of the victims' lives, and that probably should be done. But him himself, he's had the airtime. And he absolutely loved the airtime when he was alive. So I feel like at some point we have to stop talking about that man and start talking about the 16 boys he murdered.
Well, that's that serial killer 101, isn't it? That people always talk about the killer historically or whatever, however far it goes back, and not the victims. Most people don't even know what they're called because their names aren't out there, or they're not talked about.
I'm guilty of that myself. I couldn't name Dahmer's victims.
But pick a serial killer, you probably don't, because first of all, there's usually a lot of names to remember.
Exactly, it's easier to remember one.
They're not plastered in the thing, are they? Because that's what sells, as you say. It's the interest is there. It shouldn't be, but it's not that you're not necessarily interested in the victims, but the draw is this.
It's the psychology, isn't it?
Man or woman that has killed a lot of people. Yeah, that's the interest.
And why?
And
I think I've said this quite a few times on our Twitter recently, but it's fine to have that interest, but it's when you lose sight of the victims and especially when you start to romanticize someone.
Absolutely.
Is when you should take a step back and be like, actually, maybe I shouldn't be consuming this anymore because who have I become? Regardless, send us your thoughts on Carl Tanzler. Tell us what you think. Most of all, just remember, Elena deserved better in every way. And as always, especially this month, this October, remember, stay spooky. Hey guys, if you have a ghost story or a case suggestion, please email us, truecrimecovenpod@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Twitter @truecrimecoven or on Instagram and Facebook, where we are @truecrimecovenpod.
Also, it would mean the absolute world to us if you could rate us wherever you're listening to this right now, be it Spotify, Apple Music, or if you're on YouTube, give us a little thumbs up, click that bell, get notifications every time we post.
Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts from.
Make these two witches smile. Thanks, witches!